Today we're going to consider Kant's ethics. So, Kant is a very important Enlightenment philosopher, and if you've ever gone to a hospital that has a bioethics committee at it, chances are they have at least one Kantian on their staff. So, our strategy to unpack Kant is going to be focused on 3 points. If you understand what Kant says about the categorical imperative, and you understand what he says about motives, and you understand what he says about dignity, you probably have a pretty good handle on Kant's ethics. So Kant has made a lot of contributions in knowledge theory and philosophy of science, natural science, during his day in the Enlightenment. So most of what he writes in terms of an ethics theory, he crafts in the late 1700s. Kant is very good at protecting the dignity of individuals. He says you should treat everyone as an end rather than as a means, right? So when you use someone as a means, he cautions about that. So he refers to the kingdom of ends, and the kingdom of ends consists of rational beings, right? And all rational beings at some level are alike. And what is important for Kant is that you never completely use someone and treat them like just a means, right? So implicit in Kant's ethics is this idea that human dignity, or at least the dignity of a rational being, is something that you ought not to violate. And so Kant winds up referring to this in the context of the kingdom of ends. So we should talk about that. What do you want out of a moral theory? I would like dignity. Dignity is a pretty powerful approach when thinking about ethics, because sometimes you might have, for example, utilitarian ethics, which say we must try to maximize the happiness for the greatest number of persons. And there's a standard criticism of utilitarianism that it overlooks the dignity of individuals, or it can anyway. So Kant is good at defending the idea of dignity. And so I'd like to return to this idea. So dignity, important in Kant's ethics. But he also has this idea called the categorical imperative. And the categorical imperative states that you should act so you can will your own maxim to become a universal law, right? What does this mean? Your maxim is what you personally do. Could you say other rational beings could follow the same principle consistently? If you can, then it passes the consistency test. So one of the things that Kant is good at is claiming that rational beings can figure out what inconsistent versus consistent applications of rules actually are. So this is why he claims that when he's talking about ethics, he claims that rational beings can figure it out if they use the categorical imperative and they have the right motives. So Kant, by the way, doesn't believe that animals have rights. There's no if they're non-rational animals in any case. So that's different than, say, contemporary utilitarian schools, which sometimes ask whether animal cruelty is wrong. Descartes and Kant regarded non-human animals mostly as machines. And I don't think he has that right, but that's an issue for a different day. So Kant is trying to derive an ethical theory from reason alone. He claims that you can figure out what the right thing to do by reason, right? So if you're a rational being, you have what he claims is a duty to this law, to respect the moral law that connects all rational beings. This is kind of a weird claim that, he says we have this duty, but duty is extremely important for Kant's ethics. Sometimes duty-based approaches to ethics are called deontology. Kant doesn't actually call himself a deontologist, but I think probably in the 20th century, maybe a little bit earlier, people started referring to duty-based ethics as deontology. Kant distinguishes between three different types of motives. And these motives are duty, self-interest, and inclination. Only duty is a valid moral motive, according to Kant, right? And so if you're acting on inclination or fear, right, that is not a moral motive. So it may be the case that you do the wrong thing because you don't have the right motive. Sometimes you hear people say this, do the right thing for the right reason. Well, Kant is good at referring, hey, there's a cat in the backyard. Neighbor's cat. Kant refers to the right reason as being crucially important. And it's this duty to this law that connects all rational agents, right? So you and I are rational agents, right? So we can reason consistently and figure out what other rational agents could do in terms of deciding whether my own personal policy of action is consistent with the categorical imperative, right? Because he wants to say you need to be able to will your maxim to become universal law for all rational agents, or you should act it so you could will it to be a universal law for all rational agents. It sounds a little bit like the golden rule. What if everyone went around doing that? The idea that you universalize your principle. But Kant is explicit on this point, and he says, no, this isn't the golden rule. I'm doing something different here. So in Kant's mind, he thought that the categorical imperative was not the golden rule, even though they might both have a kind of superficial resemblance in that they try to universalize a principle, or it asks you to think about what would happen if other rational beings behaved as I did. So that's what the categorical imperative is about. But in terms of motives, Kant wants to say that only actions done out of motive, grounded in duty, can be valid moral actions for him. If you do something based upon self-interest, that disqualifies it as being a moral motive. He's not saying it necessarily is a bad. When you say non-moral, or one says that, you might be able to make a distinction between moral, non-moral, and immoral. In other words, there's a three-valued logic here. You might say something could be either neutral, good, or bad, right? So just because it's non-moral, it probably doesn't follow that it therefore would have to be immoral, right? So it's kind of worth recognizing that. But he wants to make this claim: if you're doing something and you don't have the right motive, then it's not a good action. So he claims that we have a duty to help those less fortunate. And so suppose I see old lady trying to cross the street, struggling with her groceries. I may help her across the street. But Kant wants to know, well, why am I doing that? Am I doing it because I think I'll get a reward? Or am I trying to look good? Am I doing it for vanity? Am I trying to impress other neighbors? If that's the reason I'm doing it, then it's not a moral motive for Kant, right? And also if you act on inclination. He makes a big deal about the distinction between fear and respect. When you respect the moral law, you're not acting on fear, but you're acting upon duty, right? So if you're acting out of fear, that probably has got to be inclination, right? Because you're scared. But Kant insists that acting on duty is the only valid, correct moral motive. He also says that you should never lie. And this is unusual for any ethicist, because most people can think of a case where wouldn't you lie if the lie could save someone's life, right? So Kant gives us these general principles by which all rational beings can calculate what is right or wrong. But he claims no one could will a lie to become universal law. So it's inconsistent with the categorical imperative for Kant. And that's why he says it's always wrong to lie.